What's up, everybody? Tom Curran's Patriots Talk Podcast coming at you with Cassel and Perry, and we're going to get into a fascinating topic as the Patriots and Cowboys get set to meet. That's the owners. Robert Kraft and Jerry Jones have intertwined histories. Both have been dominant owners. Both have found great success with their teams. Where are they similar? Where are they different? And of course, we're going to get into the matchup between the Cowboys and the Patriots. Must win for the Patriots to avoid 0-4 at home to start the 2021 season. Catch this on any of your favorite podcasting apps or right over on the YouTube. All right, there they are. It's Perry, it's Cassel. And I want to talk about what's kind of interesting in this matchup isn't even on the field, it's above it. And maybe it only appeals to me, but the intertwined legacies of Robert Kraft and Jerry Jones fascinate you guys. Mm-hmm. You got the two guys who are the dominant owners of the last 3 decades. Jones, get this. He bought the Cowboys in '89 for $140 million. They're now worth $6.5 million. Matt, that's more money than you have. He turned 79 yesterday. Had the dominant team of the 90s. They won 3 Super Bowls. But then Kraft, who is 80 years old right now, he bought his team for $1.74 in 1994. Now it's worth $5 billion. It's the second most valued team in the NFL.
Also not bad.
And you look at these guys, and they're contrasted, aren't they? I mean, Kraft is kind of the quiet, arm around you, loving deal maker on a quiet basis. And then Jones is the renegade owner who, you know, hitching his pants up, slapping back, saying whatever. He's a showman. Yeah, exactly. And Kraft is much more understated. Jones is in the Hall of Fame for what he accomplished as this renegade owner and the success. Kraft's teams have accomplished much more. Kraft has done a greater job in terms of, I think, pushing the league forward as a deal maker. I mean, Jones is, constantly creating havoc. But these two owners have been kind of the most compelling, yet Jones is in the Hall of Fame and Kraft is not. And I'm sure that rankles Patriots brass, the ownership to a degree. I'm sure Kraft would insist otherwise, but you want to be recognized. And these two guys, last thing I'll say on this, have really crossed swords in the last decade. In 2011, uncapped year, the Cowboys spent like drunken sailors, contrary to what the expectations among all the owners were, kind of a shadow collusion. And then when they came back from that, they got slapped with huge penalties, and Kraft pushed for those penalties. So Deflategate comes, and Jones pushed Kraft to accept the penalties for Deflategate. Then when Ezekiel Elliott gets suspended, Goodell famously, reportedly from Seth Wickersham and Don Van Natta said to Goodell, if you think Robert Kraft came after you hard, he is a P word compared to what I'm going to do.
Ooh,
I know, which isn't really calling Kraft that word. It's more saying he was tough. I'm going to be a lot tougher. They also fought over the kneeling conversation. So all that stuff is a backdrop to this, what may be the last meeting of these guys as the owners. Stephen Jones is in Dallas as the heir apparent to Jerry, and Jonathan Kraft will, eventually ascend to the Iron Throne here. So, Phil, does all this stuff matter to the normal fan, or is it just backstory?
No, I think this is interesting to the normal fan, because I think the normal Patriots fan might soon start to develop a little bit of a complex here, guys, because the team itself, while being the most successful franchise in North American sports last 2 decades, and going back even farther, we could argue, how many of these guys are going to get into the Hall of Fame? Bill Belichick, Tom Brady, Ty Law's in, Rob Gronkowski will get in. But I think compared to other dynasties, the Patriots may end up being kind of slighted in the way that the league remembers those teams. And I think that's a point of contention for a lot of fans here. And Robert Kraft is obviously the name at the top of the list in terms of guys that could be in right now, conceivably. and aren't. And I wonder, Tom, if it has anything to do with their roles within their own teams when you're talking about Kraft versus Jerry Jones, because Jerry Jones, right, is the boss when it comes to football operations.
Yeah.
And Robert Kraft, to his credit, has ceded those responsibilities to someone he really trusts and who has been phenomenally successful at the football operation thing, which is Bill Belichick. So I wonder how that plays in it too, but it's the way the team might be remembered. We're not far enough removed from the dynasty yet to be completely obsessed over it, but I think people are starting to wonder, okay, how well represented are we going to be in things like the Hall of Fame?
Yeah. And how much credit is Robert Kraft going to get? And I think that the book Dynasty by Jeff Benedict, told really from Kraft's point of view, was an effort to say, hey, these are the things I did. I'm the most important person, I think was the gist of the book, or Robert Kraft's the most important person because he kept it together.
Mm-hmm.
He kept it together. Matt, you played for the Dallas Cowboys. You played for the New England Patriots. You played for the Kansas City Chiefs. We got dominant, even Buffalo.
Oh, yeah.
You didn't play for the Pagulas. You played for Ralph Wilson, right?
No, Pagulas. They
them.
just took over, right? So scratch them, the Hunt family. Yeah.
Talk about those three different types of ownerships and what role owners have had in your career. I mean, do players compare?
It's interesting. You don't really compare, but when I've had these experiences, and it's pretty remarkable because like Jerry Jones was unlike any owner I've ever been around. And as I said before, he's a showman, but he's also one of those guys that he's at the front of the team meeting room and will speak to the team before the head coach after a game. Whether a win or loss at times, Jerry Jones is the first one to speak to the team. That's unlike anywhere, right? Normally the coach addresses you, maybe talks, gives you the pep talk after a loss or this. It was Jerry Jones doing it. Like, it was absolutely incredible. We went to to go play the Giants on a Sunday night game in Dallas. And all of a sudden we go and we get to go take a boat ride over. And then we go on a ferry. We have dinner at the top of the tower. I mean, it was just the whole experience was, it's Jerry Jones at the front of being the guy that everybody looks at and goes, wow, that's Jerry Jones. And he loved that role, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where Robert Kraft was a guy that was more behind the scenes, but he was definitely prominent in terms of the locker room, and his presence was known, especially after games, and the congratulatory, hug that you always look forward to, and all these. And they both, the one thing I'll say about both these guys, and I got to experience it firsthand, was when I was traded from Buffalo to Dallas, my wife was 34 weeks pregnant. So she wasn't technically able to travel. And I'll never forget, like my agent called and said, hey, Matt's family is going to be stranded here in Buffalo. Jerry sent a jet to get them to Dallas. And thank God they did. Now, I took Southwest, which was kind of messed up, but nonetheless, my family got to come and, get there safely, and we were able to find a doctor in time. Now, just backtrack a little bit and we had this conversation, Tom, last week when my father passed away during season in the 2008 season. We were staying in California because we had one of those where we played Seattle and then we played Oakland. I had to leave. I went home to California to go help with funeral arrangements, played on Sunday. After the game, Mr. Kraft was nice enough to put myself and my wife on his plane and drop me off in Southern California so that I could be with my family and go to the service the next day. But it's things like that maybe a lot of fans don't recognize. They just think that they're these businessmen and they're these huge conglomerates that just running this huge business, and their team are just a bunch of cattle. But these men genuinely care about their players. They care about the success of their team. They want to win, but at the same time, they do care about the individuals, each individual that's on that team.
Phil, when we look at Robert Kraft's role, he never was embraced, it seemed, by the old boys network of the Rooneys and et cetera. Ralph Wilson, the Hunts, Maras. Yet on the other hand, too, he's more like Jeffrey Lurie with the Eagles, or, he's certainly not Dan Snyder, but it seems as if he hasn't curried favor with them in one way or the other. It's almost as if he's wanted to be part of these clubs, and then they shun him. And I think Deflategate was a perfect example of that. Shun might be a strong word, but the whole league reveled in the Patriots getting comeuppance in 2015 and 16 in the wake of Deflategate. I think because they felt that Robert had king made with Roger Goodell. And that being the case, this was the payback from the league to Robert Kraft. And there is so much that matters to, I think, these men to have their legacy stamped with validity, which will include going into Canton, that if you are not, and if you drag it out until somebody's an octogenarian and they basically have to come on bended knee to get into the Hall of Fame, it gets difficult to swallow, not just for that individual, but for the people around them. And I would not be the least bit surprised if Robert Kraft isn't there. He's fatigued by it, doesn't understand it. Okay, Pat Bolin's in, but I'm not. Jerry Jones is in, but I'm not. It's got to hurt. It does have to hurt, Phil. And, you know, I know the Patriots and Robert Kraft probably don't like the conversation, but it has to hurt that there is no stamping of, okay, you're in, you're part of the club.
I have a question, because I don't know how the process works for owners, for contributors. How do those guys get in? I mean, it can't just be the owners say you're in or you're not, right? Aren't there writers, media people, former players, Hall of Fame members that are associated with this that would, because I don't think it should matter. He may never get the acceptance that he's looking for, Tom. Doesn't mean he shouldn't be in the Hall of Fame. And I'm sure there are some guys in the Hall of Fame that have had plenty of issues with the league over the years, over the decades. And so that's my question. Do you know how? I should know, but I don't. How does this work?
Phil, it's a good question. And to sum it up, this is what the Pro Football Hall of Fame says right on its website. A bylaws change to the selection process was instituted in August 2014, by which a contributor, defined as an individual who has made, quote, outstanding contributions to professional football in capacities other than playing or coaching, end quote, will automatically be included among the annual list of finalists for election. The guys who've been elected to the Pro Football Hall of Fame on their website, I think it's changed since then, Bill Polian and Ron Wolf in 2015, 49ers owner Eddie DeBartolo, who certainly had his litany of things in his background that were compromising. 2017 was Jerry Jones. Paul Tagliabue was a finalist. I think he got in this year, if I'm not mistaken. I lost track.
You're right.
Bobby Beathard, excuse me, that's Bethard. My brother used to say that. In 2018, got in, and Pat Bolin and Gil Brandt in 2019, both are now in the Hall of Fame. There might be others. They haven't updated the friggin' thing, but I'm not going to go too far.
It's not a huge list, is what we're talking about.
No, it's kind of recent. But again,
personnel.
It turns my stomach when I see somebody posthumously inducted into a Hall of Fame who didn't die suddenly. It's outrageous. You're not a Hall of Fame one day and then you pass away and you become a Hall of Famer. So whether it's Pat Bolin, well, Pat Bolin, you know, had Alzheimer's, but it was difficult. I mean, if he's a Hall of Famer, he's a different conversation. Ken Stabler's a better instance. Wasn't a Hall of Famer for all those years. He dies and then he's a Hall of Famer. Come on.
Yeah, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense.
So I think the Kraft thing is a sticky conversation when it comes to the Hall of Fame. I think it's probably riles them, and with good reason. And this is the last meeting, I would think, could conceivably be the last meeting. Both these guys, by the next time they meet, will be into their 80s. Isn't that crazy to think Jerry Jones and Robert Kraft are in their 80s, Matt? You're getting old.
That's wild. You're getting old, babe. You're getting old, and they're getting old. And but these are two legendary owners, you know. And so it's. I know that the game, they won't talk much about these guys. They're going to definitely show them on the sideline and everything and probably talk about them a little bit. But in terms of the ultimate game, I mean, it's going to be decided by the people on the field rather than those guys. So.
We'll get quite a bit of video, I'm sure, of Kraft and Jones on the field.
Oh, yeah, no doubt.
Jerry. Oh, yeah. All right, well, let's put a bow on the owner talk and get into the game talk.
You know, seen a lot of these Cowboys the last couple of days. This is, a really impressive group. Just kind of going back through some of my notes and just, looking at this team over, a period of years. And I'd say one thing that really just jumps out overall is just the job that they've done acquiring talent. Thinking since 2006, they've had, by far the most Pro Bowl players, and it just seems like they always have. Every time we've played them, it seems like there's always a lot of really good players on the roster. And do a really good job offensively with their schemes and put a lot of pressure on the defense. And defensively, they, as I said, they pretty much do everything well. They're ranked at the top of the league in almost every category on offense and defense, and a good kicking game. So not really a lot of weaknesses on this team. Averaging 40 points a game in the last 3 weeks, and won pretty decisively. Beat the Chargers. They're obviously a good team there. That's our only loss. So it's a pretty talented team. We know we're going to have to play our best game, and so that's what we're going to get ready to do.
All right, so there's Bill Belichick on the Dallas Cowboys. He loves talking like that. Just to back up what he's saying, Phil, 34 points per game, 440 yards per game, 172.8 rushing yards per game, 51.61 on third down. All of those are second in the National Football League. What are you seeing, Phil, when you look at these Cowboys?
And they're 40 points a game over the course of the last 3 weeks. This is an explosive group that really can attack you however they want to. It was interesting just asking Devin McCourty about Dak Prescott and his style of play now. And I think people think of him as a mobile quarterback, a running quarterback, which he is, but he is a lethal pocket passer. And that to me is maybe been the most interesting thing to watch over the course of the last couple of years. He was dynamite before he got hurt last year, and it was early in the season, but he might have been, if he continued on that pace, the front runner to win MVP of the league. And now he's come back this year after a devastating injury, a good athlete who, I don't know if he's had to change his style, Matt, but maybe just not quite as dynamic in terms of his ability to move as previously, but it hasn't mattered. He gets it out of his hands quickly. He has these great playmakers who are always open, who could do things with the ball after the catch. They've got a solid running game. So I just look at this, and as a defense, it's got to be hard to plan for, because what do you take away? We know Bill Belichick always wants to take away the other team's best option. I don't know what that is this week.
Oh, I know. And they're such an explosive offense. Like you said, they've got CeeDee Lamb, they've got Amari Cooper, but Jarwin and their other tight end, Schultz, they've been outstanding for him this year. And then you got Ezekiel Elliott and Tony Pollard. I mean, that guy's stepped up. They're become two-headed monster. The big part about this offense that's different from what it was last year is their offensive line is back intact, right? They're healthy. And when that offensive line is healthy, they're one of the best offensive lines in the National Football League. So then you've got Dak playing behind that with all the weapons. They've been outstanding, and they've been balanced. Look at just last game. They threw 32 passes. They had 34 runs. I mean, that you talk about a balanced attack, that's been able to set up that play action pass and get the ball down the field and do all the things. But they also, like you said, they know they're very comfortable within this system, right? You saw it in the first game of the season against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers when they're going to try to max pressure them all game long. And they said, what? We're gonna get the ball out quick, and they have the ability to do that. Get the ball into their playmakers' hands, let them break tackles, and get going. So, I mean, they're a very difficult team to stop because they have so many different components that they can attack you with.
When you look at them, too, look, the Patriots had success against Tampa Bay. It was a rainy night. The Bucs were missing Gronk. The Patriots still played mostly man. You had a very good night from J.C. Jackson on Mike Evans, right, Phil? Chris Godwin was silenced. Jalen Mills had a great game. But I think if I'm Dallas and I see the Patriots in man, I'm like, we're going to get them. Because I don't think the Patriots without Stephon Gilmore are a good man team, especially without a second corner like McCourty or Mills. And Mills, I'm suddenly bumping up to Jason McCourty level. But I think the Patriots are not suited to play man yet. Even though they love to do it, I don't know if they're good enough. Matthew.
That's in their DNA, though. That's what, I mean, to me, that's what the Patriots want to play. They want to be a man defense. They want to get after you up front with the multiple personnel groups in the back end, nickel, dime. You know, they're going to try to utilize the safety position because they have guys like Kyle Duggar and Adrian Phillips and guys that are versatile that can come play in the box and still be run defenders as well as pass defenders. But like you said, this is a tough matchup for anybody because when you look outside against this group, this is one of the better skilled groups, if not like top 5, I'd say, in the league, surrounded by a talented quarterback. And not only that, you don't just worry about, like when we talked about Tampa Bay, we said, let them run the ball, right? We don't think that Fournette and Jones is going to go off and have 200 yards rushing. But when you look at this team in the backfield, when Ezekiel Elliott's playing the way he is and Tony Pollard, now you've got a whole different part of problems. You can't just take away the run and say, throw it. Right. They've got a balanced attack. So it's got to be, you've got to mix and match coverages, confuse them a little bit, and at the same time be really good in all phases.
I think they're really going to be tested through the air here because, again, Prescott is really smart, and he knows if you're going to pressure, which the Patriots, I think, will try to do more and more of as teams start to find out that the Patriots aren't all that deep at the cornerback spot. And they probably already know it, but maybe Jalen Mills comes back to earth a little bit if he's back on the field, or maybe the Patriots have to throw out Juwan Williams on the field again on the outside. I mean, they're going to get attacked. That number 2 corner, whoever it is going to be attacked. And right now, as it stands, even though they have some really good points per game numbers, they're top 5 in the league, points per game. But through the air, they've given up their share. They're about 7.5, just below that, 7.3 yards per attempt, which is middle of the pack in the NFL. When it comes to third down conversions allowed, they're middle of the pack in the NFL. So they have some statistics that would suggest it's one of the better defenses in football through 5 weeks of the season. Through the air, not so much. And this is a team that can attack you across the board, multiple different ways, where Matt mentioned the tight ends, the backs, or the top 2 receivers.
Here's the interesting thing about man versus zone as well. Look, I think the Patriots, they don't yet have, and Gerard Mayo spoke about this, we highlighted his quote earlier, they're too multiple right now. They got to dumb it down, because it's not that they don't have guys who can do it, because you have Hightower, Van Noy, Collins, Judon Smart, McCourty's at the back end, Duggar should be intelligent enough, Phillips, but they continue to have one guy doing something wrong on key plays, enough where it's like, okay. And it's great that you can put so many players in different spots and use your Swiss Army knife in Dante Hightower or Winovich or Uche or whatever, but they're letting up too many long drives because of critical mistakes on certain plays. I think the Patriots should dumb it down and play simple cover 2 and just cover guys and make them make plays. All that said, when we look at the teams that the Patriots have held in check too, they haven't seen good quarterbacks. They saw one. Other than that, it's Tua, Zach Wilson, Jameis, and then Davis Mills. So their numbers come with a caveat. Meanwhile, Dallas has beaten the Chargers, beaten the Eagles. Okay, not that great a team. Beaten the Panthers, who've been playing really well. Well, I know, Phil. I know. No McCaffrey. They're not the same team.
We'll see.
Yeah.
No, you're not incorrect. Giants. Okay, so neither one has faced the iron. Of course, Tampa Bay played the Dallas Cowboys early in the season and beat them by 2. Patriots are 3.5-point home dogs. God bless them, because Gillette Stadium matters, but I can't see why Dallas isn't favored by more. They're a better team. They're playing better, and they play in better competition. Hit it.
I actually might be taking the Patriots here. That just feels like a lot of points on the road for a team that they have not played the iron. And so while I believe in their skill offensively, I'm not 100% sure what they are defensively just yet. They've got a great corner, Trayvon Diggs, who's been intercepting the ball at a ridiculous rate, and they can get after the quarterback a little bit. But I think I need to see it probably more consistently from them against good competition, Matt. And not that the Patriots are the iron anymore in the NFL, but I think I might take the Patriots. Give me those points this week. Is that crazy?
No, I mean, it's not crazy, but they're going to have to put together a complete football game against this team. And like you said, against the Dallas defense, while they're getting a ton of praise and Dan Quinn's getting a lot of recognition for changing the outlook. Look, they're giving up, like, at this point in the season, last year, they gave up 63 more points than what they have this year, right? And the biggest thing for them is they're creating turnovers, which they weren't able to do last year. They're second in the league in turnovers. And so, therefore, you add that combination, that really helps. And you can overlook some of the other inconsistencies that a defense has when you're getting the ball back for your offense and they're able to go down and get another drive in the game. I don't think that they have a dominant pass rush. I think Parsons is pretty good. Gregory's good as well on the edge. But at the end of the day, I don't believe that they're a dominant pass rush. They're doing a better job of mixing coverages than what they have in the past. Normally, they've been one of these teams that's a very vanilla defense, but they're doing a better job of mixing and matching. However, I'm not sold on the defensive side. I don't know if they can keep pace with this production that they've had in terms of getting the ball back for the offense. And so I do think that the New England Patriots can move the ball. We're not talking about a defense here that is just a stymied defense is going to just completely shut you down, right? You're going to be able to move the ball. You're going to be able to score points. The biggest concern that I have more so than anything else is the ability to stop Dak Prescott and this group consistently and keep pace with them.
The Cowboys are 31st in the NFL in passing yards allowed per game. They're 311. we've seen, and Phil has pointed out, the travails of the Patriots downfield passing game. Phil, so there should be an opportunity to press it down the field. Phil, run through some of those Mac Jones numbers.
Yeah, there should be an opportunity, though. I will say, I think some of those numbers for Cowboys opponents might be a little bit inflated because
Trying to come back.
They're up so much at some of these games that teams are just chucking. And the Cowboys are probably perfectly okay with giving up some yards if it means they're not going to be able to come back on them and burn time on the clock. But let me just give you where they're at in terms of explosive passing game. They're 22nd. The Patriots are 22nd in the league in terms of explosive pass rate, which isn't awful. But Matt, when we're talking about throwing the ball down the field, they are worst in the NFL in a number of different categories on throws that travel 20 yards or more down the field. Mac Jones is last in yards. He's last in yards per attempt. He's last in adjusted completion percentage. Just over 20% of those passes are getting completed. He's last in quarterback rating, 8.8. You get 37 quarterback rating just for throwing it into the ground, spiking it to stop the clock. So, he's second to last. Pro Football Focus does their turnover worthy play percentage. He's second to the last in the NFL when it comes to that metric. So I don't know. We're through 5 weeks. Do you have enough evidence at this point to say, well, the Patriots just aren't a very good down the field passing team? It's not like they do it all that often. Only 10% of Mac Jones's attempts travel that far down the field as it is. So I don't know how much further you could actually dial back those attempts, but they have been bad, plain and simple, when it comes to their production throwing deep down the field. So I don't know if they can keep pace with this Cowboys offense, if that's the case.
I want to hear Matt's take on that. And I also want to hit the fine print on some of those reasons after Matt's take on the numbers, on the raw numbers.
Yeah, it's really interesting in terms of when you look at this team and they're not pushing the ball down the field, but they're not attempting to push the ball downfield. We saw the one to Jacoby Myers. If he catches that, that's considered an explosive, right? The one that he dropped against Houston, that's one time where he pushed the ball down the field. But other than that, like they've no over the top shots, just go routes, right? We don't see a lot of that where we're dropping back 5 steps, 101 on the outside. Let's take a shot. But who's the guy that you're going to throw that to? Or is it Kendrick Bourne? Is it Nelson Aguilar? Is it N'Keal Harry at this point? I know he just came back. I don't know. But at the same time, they're also not dialing it up to where they're trying to get that shot with max protection or, 7-man protection and get the ball down the field. And so I don't know if that's a product of just worrying about whether or not they can protect or staying ahead on down and distance. But as I said before, this has historically been a possession passing team, right? Catch and run, set up matchups on the inside. But even with that being said, at some point you have to push the ball down the field, because what does that do to a defensive back or a defensive safety? When you're able to hit, just take your shots, right? You don't always have to hit them, but it backs them off. It softens them up. So then it does open up the underneath coverage a little bit. But if they continue to not take shots down the field, well, then all those defensive backs and those guys are going to be taught, hey, sit on these routes, right? Rally quickly, jump routes, because they're not going to try to push the ball down the field. So whether it's double moves or whatever, there's so many different ways in which you can try to create that, but they haven't been able to yet.
And they're also trying to, or it allows defenses to rotate a safety into the box. Just play single high safety, you put an extra guy in the box, and it gums up the Patriots running game, which we have seen on some occasions. It was interesting. I think it was against New Orleans, Phil, where Mac Jones tried to press it down the field twice down the left side on the first possession to Nelson Aguilar. There was a double move there. I think with Malcolm Jenkins might have been in coverage. He just bottled it up. So I think the effort is there, but I think some of it has to do with the protection, which was absolutely shameful until last week. And then the rest is maybe some of the, and we'll play some Josh McDaniel sound in a second, just getting used to each other, but they cannot go away from it. This is not something you say, can't do it. The last thing too, Mac Jones can throw downfield. We saw it in preseason. We saw it in training camp. Mm-hmm. He is not Steph Curry, but he's, I would say, who's giving me a good three? It's not Klay Thompson either. I would say he's Jason Tatum level outside thrower. Sure.
Yeah, I would just say like they're not throwing it down the field all that often, but I think some of the names that are below him in terms of the down the field percentage of their throws would surprise, like Justin Herbert, for instance, throws it 20 yards or more down the field less often than Mac Jones does. So it's like the raw numbers, yes, total yards down the field, because they don't do it all that much. That's one thing, but it's like the per attempt numbers to be 5 yards per attempt on 20-yard throws is abysmal. And yes, the protection's been an issue, But I think at some point you just got to look at the playmakers and just say, okay, do we have people who can win down the field? Do we have everything you need to make those plays go? And at some point you might just have to say, we don't. And we might have to do it every once in a while to soften them up occasionally, keep them honest, but it's just not going to be a part of who we are, what we do.
Let's run some sound from Josh McDaniels from earlier this week, talking about the things that you have to figure out that you're good at and the things that you have to cut bait on.
Schematically, I think we're trying to, settle in on some things that we feel like we know how to do. And there's always going to be an element each week of something that maybe we don't do it a lot, but we're going to do it this week more. Certainly that happened in Houston, and I'm sure it'll happen again this week against a really good defense in Dallas. So I feel better about where we're at. I think by 6 to 8 weeks, you kind of know, where you're at and what you want to, and really more than anything else, what you want to stop trying to get good at. Because that's really where you can waste your time during the season as a coach. Is, you went into the season with this mindset, like, I really want to be good at this. I really want to be good at this. And then you look at yourself, 6, 8 weeks in, and you're like, we're no good at this, and at that point as a coach, it's time to cut bait and just say, listen, we're good at other things. And we tried for 3 months to really make this go. And, for whatever reason, it could be a number of reasons, it's not very productive. So it's time to move forward and let the players do the things that they do best. And I think, like I said, I think we're getting closer to that.
Meanwhile, Josh McDaniels, before we get into this, Matt, he uses the term cut bait. Do you know that fish are cut bait? It's kind of hard. Does that mean you cut the bait loose and stop doing it? Or does it mean you should either be fishing or you have to be doing things to prepare you for fishing, cutting the bait? There's
very interesting of how you describe that. I think it's cut bait with the plays in the.
That's what he means.
Schematically, right? Cut bait with the things that you're not doing well. Like we've tried this out, right? We've gone in, we've banged our head against the wall. We've tried to do it in different personnel groups, but it's just not something this offensive unit does well for whatever reason. We got to get rid of that and stick to the format that's going to be most successful and advantageous for our group, whatever it might be in the run game, in the pass game. And so what he's basically talking about is developing that identity. And throughout the course of the first part of the season, there are so many new factors to this offense, whether it's the quarterback position, the wide receiver, the tight end position. Right now, the movement in the offensive line because of the injuries, the COVID and all that stuff. So they are trying to find an identity in which they haven't been able to really establish that yet and what they're exactly good at. And I think that they're finding those different plays, those different concepts that Mac Jones might feel more comfortable with. They're finding that run game a little bit in the second half last week against Houston. Mind you, it's Houston. But at some point, you've got to really dial that into what they do well. And now we've got to execute that at a higher level and get rid of all the other stuff that we're not being successful at.
Phil, is it taking too long? I mean, a lot of these guys didn't go to OTAs. You spent a quarterback not splitting reps. He got more reps than Cam, but I mean, it's going to be friggin' Thanksgiving by the time they get their shit straight.
Tom, I think enough time has elapsed that at least you can identify some trends and you can say to yourselves, okay, we're not going to cut bait necessarily after 5 weeks of not being able to throw it down the field. But if we get to 6 or 7 weeks and these trends continue and we start to get players back and these trends continue, then we might have to make some adjustments. So, we talked about the down the field passing thing. I don't know if they'll actually dial that back, but we'll see. I would say one thing that they've actually been pretty good at, and we're lucky in that we get numbers from whether it's Pro Football Focus or Sports Info Solutions or Warren Sharp, who does a great job, Sharp Football Stats, in terms of being able to spot some of these trends. So to me, one thing they've been pretty good at, even though the running game has not been good, is their downhill running game.
Yeah, right? No doubt.
Plowing behind their guards. They have been good. They've been over 5 yards per carry, according to Sharp Football. When they try to run it outside, a lot of those toss plays, those crack toss plays, they got one big one last week from Brandon Bolden, 24 yards. Really, up until then, they've been averaging about 2 yards per carry when they try to run outside. So I would say the downhill running game is something they should stick with. I would say they've been a little bit better team throwing out of 21 personnel than they have been out of 12 personnel, which is surprising to me. This 2 tight end package is supposed to be transforming this offense, right? Just hasn't been the case so far. They're just over 6 yards per attempt through the year with their 2 tight ends on the field. They're a little bit better out of 21, even though Jakob Johnson's not a real receiving threat, right? So I think that might be why last week you see Jonnu Smith in the backfield 4 or 5 times. So maybe they're trying to kind of combine those two things. Okay, can we get a little bit more production with our 2 tight ends on the field, but putting them in different spots? So I think there are things like that they won't necessarily excise right away, but you are kind of running out of time to figure out whether or not you can be good at them.
And
Matt,
the other part of that, I think, is with what Phil was saying also is when you have 12 personnel, you can bring Jonnu Smith and his versatility that he has to come back and play a little bit of the fullback. Well, it makes that defensive side of the ball go, well, shoot, I know at 12 personnel, we're looking at these guys as receiving tight ends, right? So we might go into a nickel defense, right? Or substitute the linebacker out for a defensive back because we got to be better in the pass game. But then all of a sudden you move him back. They're now in this decision-making process on the defensive side. Do we go base? And when they go base, that's a big benefit for the Patriots, right? Now you can say, okay, they've been in base the last 3 times we've been in this personnel group. Now let's spread them out. We're going to get a mismatch, whether it's Hunter Henry, Jonnu Smith, or move those wide receivers inside, because it simplifies things. When they stay in base defense, a lot of times it simplifies things and it doesn't get as complex when you're dealing with multiple defensive back personnel groups. And so that's one way in which they should build off of that personnel group, especially if they can run the ball dominantly inside the tackles. Because let's be honest, with this running back group, they're not a horizontal running back group. They're not going to go sideline to sideline. If you get them running to the sideline, it's not good. But they are a downhill running group. And when they're inside the tackle, that's where they run the best. And Damian Harris has shown that.
Matt, if you were with Josh McDaniels and this was your offense and you guys are working together, would you feel good about what you have at your disposal with the performance for the first 5 weeks? Or would you start to say, we got to cut it with some of this stuff?
There's a few things that I would definitely sit there and say, look, we're not doing this real well, or this guy is not performing the way that we want him to. So let's mix our personnel, or get this guy over in a route pattern in which we think he can go win. Stacks, bunches, all those things that can help that those wide receivers get off the ball. That was something that we majored in when I was there. And so I would love to see more of it, to come into the stacks, release patterns, multiple release patterns, giving this defense something else to look at and have them communicate, because a lot of time that's where a lot of these big plays are made, right? When the defense has to communicate. And then also at the same time, they're not in a ton of 11 personnel. When I was there, we majored in 11 personnel because of the guys that we had, right? And so you could set up a ton of 3 wide receiver sets over here with an isolated tight end. Immediately, coverage, right? And then we motion back to 2x2. You give me 2 plays in the helmet. And I don't know if they're doing that. They probably are to some degree, but it was a different type of offense. We were more in a spread type offense than what they are now, which is more of a 2-back, 12 personnel group, run the ball, keep it simplistic, but not as much of the drop back game as what this offense had been accustomed to in the past. So that's also something interesting for Josh McDaniels of how he's been calling games versus how they used to call games.
I have a feeling they might evolve into more of a drop back passing team and say that's who we are. We didn't want to be that. We wanted to run the ball. It's not what we're doing. Because if you put a bunch of Kendrick Bourne and Nelson Aguilar and Jacoby Myers on the same side, and isolate even Jonnu Smith on the other side, one back. Maybe I'm coming up with a goofy formation here, but there's 3 different skill sets that you have to deal with coming out of that stack. Matt,
right?
I just drew that up on the thing. What's stupid about what I just said?
It's not stupid at all. I mean, I always like spreading out the defense because I thought a lot of times you can see, unless you're in base, right, you know what you're going to get and you have your plays. But in terms of throwing the ball, when you're 11 personnel and you can use the formational keys that they have, and that's what I'm talking about, where you isolate certain guys and skill sets and hey, I got Jonnu Smith on a safety. I like that. And that's what Tennessee Titans really were successful at, was isolating him on the backside and getting a favorable matchup with him one-on-one with a linebacker or a safety, and you take that shot down the field, right? But then also you can see the rotation, use your double cadences, and all of a sudden they go to 2 high defense. Hey, we're going to run the ball against a light box. And we've got guys on the field that can go now attack the point of contact right there at the end of the line of scrimmage, and also the linebackers. It's really easy to see. And then you call a run versus a pass. So there's a lot of different stuff that you can do from an offensive standpoint that when you spread teams out versus when you condense formations, if that makes sense.
I think there's more to be had from Aguilar and Bourne. I think there's much more to be had from Aguilar. It's got 16 catches for $197, Phil.
And I think that's one of the reasons why they've been so ineffective throwing it down the field, is that he's just been invisible. And I think he's dealing with a little bit of an injury early this year, but the guy was over 18 yards per catch last season. Right. And this season, you can't find him. And I like the spreading it out suggestion, where you're talking about going with 11 personnel. And I think they've been in 11 personnel probably more than they want. Like the 12 personnel package, they've really only used it about a quarter of their snaps, it looks like. And I think part of that is because they've been behind. And so they've been in situations where they have to throw it. And to me, Mac Jones just looks really comfortable when he's in the shotgun and it's spread out. One of the things, I'm writing about this for NBCSportsBoston.com. One of the things that I pointed out was, one of the things that you should feel okay with, and maybe you could lean on it even a little bit more, is going no huddle. And you might put your defense in a bind there if you end up going 3 and out. But to me, he looks comfortable in those situations. His quarterback rating out of the no huddle, and they haven't used it all that much. It's less than 10% of their, fewer than, 10% of their snaps. But his quarterback rating's better out of the no huddle than it is in all situations. And so, he hasn't thrown a pick, and he's up near 70% completion. So can you lean on that a little bit more to give defenses a hard time and make it easier for your quarterback? They're near the bottom of the league, guys, when it comes to points scored. So whether it's becoming more explosive, just more efficient, making it harder on the defense by going no huddle, by spreading them out, by using Jonnu Smith as a fullback, they've got to pull every lever right now, because when it comes to scoring points, they just have not been good.
Matt, last word on this matchup before we get out of here.
Last word, defense is going to have to step up. I think this is one of the, I believe that the offense is going to be able to move the ball, score points. They have to definitely take care of the ball in this game, because as we know, we talked about the Dallas Cowboys' ability to take the ball away, but it's more, this matchup's going to come down to how this defense plays. I mean, getting after the quarterback with Dak Prescott, stopping the run, but then also, if you're going to play man-to-man, you better come and play it really well this week, because this is a team that can get after you in all different phases in terms of their offensive unit.
All right. Well, they had a good second half against the Houston Texans. Chris Moore and Brandon Cooks and Davis Mills not bringing the same clout as the Dallas Cowboys. We'll see how it goes on Sunday. Thanks, boys.
Here we go.